Good evening. You've enjoyed the carols so far, and you've enjoyed the readings, and also the wordsmith, I believe you call them, don't you? They're called Di Woodbridge, and he asked us, didn't he, to think about what we picture when we look at Christmas. And he said, look beyond the Christmas postcard, look beyond the stable, and to what Christmas is all about. And I just want to ask us for a few minutes tonight, what is in your mind when you picture that nativity scene? What's in your mind when you picture that nativity scene? There's lots of great things about Christmas. And I must admit, one of the things that comes to my mind is the school nativity. We've got a little picture that's going to come up there. I don't know if you remember being in a school nativity yourself or going to see your children or your friends in one. But they're a great time of celebration, of joy, of happiness, of cuteness. And they can be quite a kind of a safe, quite a cosy way of picturing the nativity story. And we could be quite familiar with that kind of story told at Christmas time. And we here at Highgrove, we have our nativities and we enjoy those things. That may be one picture that's in your head at Christmas time. I've got a bit more of a modern take on that, perhaps more of a kind of a postcard picture. If you could put that one up, Joe, as well. This kind of thing. I don't know if you, when you think about the nativity scene, whether these kinds of images come to your head. And we've got some angels there. You can sort of make out the camels in the distance, and we've got a few donkeys and cows, and perhaps some shepherds there with their shepherd's crooks, and of course Jesus in the manger, in that stable, right at the heart of the picture. Some wonderful images, but what the one thing that the wordsmith Di Robinson kind of pointed out, Di Woodbridge, is that actually there's a real danger with those things, that we can get an airbrushed view of the Christmas story, that we can see somehow in these kinds of images that are great. We can see, if you like, through rose-tinted spectacles, those first days of Jesus's time here on earth. And, there's some aspects of that Christmas scene that we see that are truly wonderful. And there's a lot to the Christmas story that is about celebration. It's about joy and happiness, and about having fun with your friends and your family. That's really important. One of our readings earlier on just touched on the story of the shepherds, hearing the good news of Jesus. And we can hear the joy of the angels as they proclaim that a saviour is born. And these shepherds, running down the hillside to meet the baby Jesus. And here we see that God chooses to reveal himself as here on earth, come as God in human flesh, reveals himself to these poor shepherds. These shepherds who, are on their night shift. They're out on the hills. These aren't the well-connected in society. These aren't the kind of highfalutin movers and shakers of their day. These shepherds are poor, lowly people in their society. They aren't the seniors. They aren't the important or the powerful ones. And yet God, through his angels, reveals this wonderful message of Jesus been born in a town in Bethlehem, the saviour of the world. And they are the ones that are entrusted with this powerful and important message, to go and tell this good news and to find the saviour who's been born. Just ordinary guys out on their night shift in the cold. Poor people who experience something of God's favour in their life. And there's another character that we heard about tonight as well, that of Mary. Mary here, just a young girl, perhaps a young teenage girl who receives that astonishing news that through her birth of the baby Jesus, there would be one stepping into the world who would bring God close to us. God with us, Emmanuel. And we see there that this girl Mary is said, just as Harry said in our reading earlier on, that she would be highly favoured. And this leads her to sing a wonderful song of worship to God, just like we've been singing tonight. We've been singing a song of praise to God for what he's done, this wonderful thing. And, she says this in her song. She says, he has brought down the rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. And she there, talking about herself and those around her, saying, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve this honour. I don't deserve to be highly favoured of God. And yet she says, in this great reversal, God has given me this opportunity, me, a humble person, to be part of his amazing story at that first Christmas time. And so that there's so much to be joyful about. There's so much to celebrate in the Christmas story. But if we stop there, and if we stick with an airbrushed view of Christmas, like we might see in a Christmas nativity or on a postcard picture, then we're in danger of missing out on something far deeper that's happening through this story. This Mary, a poor, young teenage girl, a teenage mum who becomes a pregnant teenage mum, a vulnerable girl who, we read and we heard in our reading earlier on that she was at risk of being left profoundly vulnerable as Joseph, her partner, is deciding in his mind to, before the intervention of God, deciding in his mind to perhaps divorce her quietly on the side, so not to disgrace her. And yet God, through his angel, speaks to Joseph. And in both care for Mary and also speaking into his life, this angel covers over Mary's vulnerability there. And this Mary finds herself heavily pregnant, needing to make this trip from Judea to Bethlehem. And I Googled this to look it up. I wasn't quite sure how far we're talking there. And I tell you, I don't know if you've been heavily pregnant yourself or someone who has been. I'm sure that if you find yourself in that situation, you might not want to be making a kind of tour of the Middle East for 80 miles. That journey that Mary takes. There's no mention of a donkey, by the way, but perhaps there was one, you don't know. But she walks for 80 miles, perhaps a 4 or 5 day trip on dangerous roads. I wonder at that point if she'd said to herself, I'm highly favoured. Perhaps she wasn't feeling that at that particular moment. This Mary finds herself walking to Bethlehem and giving birth, without any kind of strong medical attention that we might have these days. In a town that is one that's completely unfamiliar to her, with no friends or close family nearby. Mary and Joseph find that they are part of God's story. So I don't know whether she was feeling highly favoured. But shortly after, and if you've read the Bible accounts of Jesus' birth, if you carry on reading, you find out that Jesus and his parents have to flee from Bethlehem. And perhaps as at least a young toddler, we see Jesus needing to flee to Egypt, becoming a refugee, because the local king there was threatened by Jesus' birth and was looking to wipe out all of the young boys that had been born in that area. And so Jesus himself becomes a refugee and flees to Egypt. That's perhaps the darker side of the Christmas story. That's the non-airbrushed side that we might see this Christmas. Because, it might be for you that this Christmas time is a time of mixed emotions. For many of us, Christmas can be quite a difficult time. It can be a difficult time for our wallets. It can be a time of stress, and perhaps for you, actually getting together with your family and your friends can actually be a time of high tension and difficulty, and a time you don't necessarily look forward to. It may be for you that you feel this Christmas time that you're far from peace, far from hope. You may look at your life and feel that you look at the cards you've been dealt and feel that you've got a poor deal of cards, that you identify more with those shepherds who've been given a difficult time of life, more than perhaps the wise men or the kings of their day, looked over or left out. It might be for you this Christmas that you're more aware than ever of your own inadequacies. It may be this Christmas time that you're brokenhearted and that you're seeking hope and peace this Christmas time. And I think as we look at the life of Jesus as this young baby, it's important that we take in the full picture of what it looked like for Jesus to come as a baby to this earth. Because I think it tells us something really important about God. You know, when God stepped into this world, he chose not to step into a picture-perfect, postcard, Instagrammable life. He stepped into the real world. He stepped into a world that wasn't comfortable. It wasn't safe. It did have joys and happinesses, but it also had tough times. And he stepped into that world. And you know what? I think that's the sort of world that you and I inhabit. It's a world where we have joys, but we also have sorrows. You know, when John, the Gospel of John, when he's writing that, John, he doesn't talk about the nativity. He doesn't give us nice words to read at Christmas time in those same ways. But we often do read some of those opening words of John in John's Gospel. And he talks about how Jesus came as light in the darkness. And we know that our lives can be full of joy, can be full of sorrow. They can also be full of darkness. And John, when he's writing his account of Jesus' life, says that Jesus came to be light in the darkness. Because we live in a world too where teenagers get pregnant and find themselves in difficult or vulnerable circumstances. We live in a world where refugees, sadly, are created through the bad actions of others and are forced to flee from their homes. And I think that actually that picture, the picture of a Jesus that chooses to be born into a world of pain and difficulty and of mess, is a picture of good news for us this Christmas time. Because I know that when I look at myself and when I look at the world around me, sometimes I can see a lot of mess. I can see a lot of difficulty. And I can recognise, just as Di Woodbridge said on that video, that actually God can come and was born into a world to make the mess of the world right. He was born in the mess to make the wrong right. And if I'm going to encounter God this Christmas time, I know that I need a God who can deal with me just like I am, with my inadequacies and my failures, with all my joys and all my happiness. I want a God to meet me in that and to shine his light in my life, that I might know change and healing through Jesus this Christmas time. You know, Jesus, as he was a young man, he stood up in a synagogue, like a local church, and he read some important words. He said this, he said, you know, I've come to proclaim good news to the poor, to proclaim freedom for those locked up in prison. I've come to proclaim sight for the blind and to set the oppressed free. You know, the good news this Christmas time is that if we choose to embrace the good news of Jesus, the Jesus born as a baby, the Jesus come to die a criminal's death on a cross, he'd come to set us free. And even though we live in a world of mess and of pain, and often of darkness, we can know joy, we can know happiness, and we can know his light this Christmas time by looking to him, the Saviour of the world. Why don't we stand? And we're going to sing our final carol, or final carols, I should say. And just to say, this Christmas time, if you would like to think a bit more about this life of Jesus, there's lots of different ways in which you can engage, both here at Highgrove, and there's lots of other churches nearby too. But one thing you could do is to think about the life of Jesus, about who he is and what he came to do here on earth. And I commend to you one of these little booklets. It's called Why Jesus? And it answers just that. Why Jesus? What's important about Jesus this Christmas time? And so if you'd like to take one of these red booklets, you're more than welcome to take one. And just as you leave tonight, after your mince pies and your drinks, do grab one of these booklets. They're just at the black table there, just by the door. We'd love you to take one of these. And we'd love to see you at one of our other services.